for joining us today for the second event in our Collaborative Democracy Network series of events. Welcome to everybody in the room. It's fantastic that you made it here. Hope you're as relieved as I am that then tube strikes were cancelled. We were very pleased about that. And also very warm welcome to everybody who's joining us online. There's probably quite a few people online as well joining us, which is great. So I'm just going to introduce myself and a little bit about the network and about Demos. Then I'm going to introduce our speakers. They're going to speak for about 10 minutes each, and then we're going to open up for discussion from the floor. And we'd really love to hear kind of your responses, your feedback, your questions for our fantastic speakers that we've got today. So, to introduce myself, I'm Miriam Levin. I'm the Director of Participatory Programmes here at Demos. Demos is a think tank. For those who don't know us, we've been around for about 30 years. And for people who weren't at our launch event, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the Collaborative Democracy Network. So we set it up to be a space where we could bring politicians, policymakers and civil society together to kind of look at different ways of putting people at the heart of policy making. Because at Demos, we believe that the way policy making is done at the moment doesn't really get to the heart of tackling the challenges that the country is facing. So policy making in Whitehall can feel a little bit like a black box, kind of input comes in, policy comes out, and the people who are going to be affected by those policies are very, very rarely kind of involved in those conversations, in the development of those policies, and thinking about how they're going, what impact they'll have and how they're implemented. So they have there's not really space for those people to be involved in determining what the right questions are that you want to ask when you're creating your policy. And so those questions really get to the heart of the issues that people face, and they're not part of coming up with some of the solutions that you might need to tackle the issues that people are facing on the ground. So we know that trust in politics and in politicians and political institutions is declining. It's declining at a steep rate, and that feels, certainly to me, feels really frightening. And there's kind of loads of reasons behind that, but one of the things that we're really interested in looking at is people feeling like they have no stake in the decisions that are made in Westminster, in Whitehall. That's kind of one part of why we have this kind of great decline in trust in politics. There are many other things behind it, but that's the issue that we're specifically focusing on because we think there's actually really practical, positive, healthy things you can do about it. And those all kind of add up to creating what we're terming a collaborative democracy. So democracy that enables politicians and people and experts to come together to tackle our problems and think about how that can really help to embolden politicians to make some of the really, really difficult choices that are coming. They're like really hard choices coming down the track. We're going to have a really grown-up conversation with people about the trade-offs that we're going to need to make, and we want to bring all those different people into the room to make that happen. And if we do that, what we hope we'll do is create policies that really work for people and rebuild some trust in our democratic system. But we also know it's super easy to say that, and it's really, really hard to do. And we need to learn from the good practice that's out there. We want to learn from what's working really well. We want to learn from where things haven't worked so well, as kind of these participatory and deliberative tools are kind of adopted and used kind of across the world. And that's why the event today. Kind of bringing it back to these fantastic group of women that we've got kind of here for you today. What these guys are going to do is share kind of what Westminster can learn from these democratic innovations that are being used kind of across the world and locally. And we are incredibly lucky, particularly to have Lisa and Claudia here, just because they're only in the UK for a very, very brief time. So we're delighted to be able to welcome them here to Demos today and hear from their international experience. So I'll introduce everybody. First up, we're going to have Lisa Witter. So Lisa is the co-founder of Apolitical, which is a global peer-to-peer learning platform for public servants. And she's also the CEO of the Apolitical Foundation, which works to renew political leadership for the 21st century. Lisa's focus areas include leadership, behavioural science and politics. Claudia is an author, an activist and an entrepreneur. She is the founder and CEO of Democracy Next, which is an international research and action institute working to shift political and legislative power to everyday people through citizens' assemblies. Before founding Democracy Next, Claudia set up and led the OECD's work on innovative citizen participation. And if you haven't read Catching the Deliberative Wave and 8 Ways to Institutionalize Deliberation, or deliberative democracy, read them. For those of us in the sector, they are the Bibles of all of these things, so incredibly grateful for that work. And lastly, I'm delighted that we've got Councillor Georgia Gould here, who joins us as the Labour leader from Camden Council. She also chairs London Council's a cross-party collective of London boroughs. As leader of Camden Council, she's made citizen power and participation a priority. Camden was the first local authority to hold a climate emergency citizens' assembly in 2019. And she writes and speaks on issues of devolution, community power, and the experiences of young people. So we're incredibly grateful that you've all joined us here today. And I'm going to come to you first, Lisa. If you could tell us a bit about the insights that you've gathered about the opportunities and barriers to politicians across the world adopting democratic innovations, and most importantly, what the UK could learn from all of this.
Super. Before I start, we want to hear about you. So we want to get a sense of who's in the room. So if you are here as a civil servant, I know that you wear many hats, many of you in your lives, but if you're here as a civil servant, raise your hand. We love civil servants, that's great. So you can raise a proudly civil servant. How about politicians, elected officials? There we go, fantastic. 2 for 2 so far. Let me just put it this way, maybe democracy junkies, like you're here because you're a democracy junkie and you work on that day in and day out. The politicians can raise their hands too, that's fine. Journalists, I know there's one, yeah. Academics? Any dancers, musicians? Right there you go. How about in the back, what are you guys? I just want to gather your categories.
So I don't know if that counts as civil service.
Okay, sure, yeah. Local government, fantastic. Local government, sure. It all counts to me. So this topic is super dear to my heart. I've been working in politics since I can kind of remember being conscious, because it seemed to me the place the two things that I love the most came together. I was a competitive athlete, I loved winning, and I wanted to help people. So if you love winning, you want to help people, you go into politics. And every single politician that I have worked with has loved, we didn't call it this, but deliberative democracy, or actually like co-creating with citizens before there was a category. So I thought this was normal. Like I didn't know that it wasn't normal. So I've spent time in government and in politics on both sides as a civil servant and then as a political appointee. And I've worked with politicians all around the world to get elected and then to actually be great representative leaders. So what I want to just briefly share with you today, and I have 2 hats on. One is our work at the foundation, which helps have political leadership for the 21st century, which includes, keeping up with the demands that citizens have about representation and being reactive and proactive. And then the other, at the end, I'll talk a little bit about what we find out at Apolitical, listening to the civil servants around the world. So I've been really fortunate. I want to bring 2 people in the room here. There's 2 empty chairs for them there. John Anderson and Omazine Khalifa. They're 2 folks that we collaborated with on a project to better understand, thanks Claudia, to better understand what is the gap and the opportunity to bridge the great work that your work was just called a Bible, Claudia. I want to know how that feels later. That you have captured so much of, and many of you have been involved with. Where is that gap, and how do we bridge that gap to work with more politicians to uptake this and really institutionalize and even make the wave even bigger? So what I want to do is share with you some results of some research that we've just done and what we found on how to engage politicians in democratic innovations. So I'm just quickly, number one, politicians across the world and across the political spectrum get that whatever we're doing isn't working. Number 2, the barriers to adopting it can be overcome. This is a solvable problem. This is exciting. 3, that the democratic innovation is not considered urgent on either side of the political spectrum. Number 4, the term democratic innovation is confusing and itself a barrier. So we talk to a lot of politicians. They're like, I do democratic innovation. I listen to citizens. I have town halls. And I'm sure you know from the work that Claudia and many have done, the process is really an important part of it, and that politicians are often scared of town halls or being with their citizens because, frankly, it's scary. 80% of female politicians around the world get death threats on a regular basis. And my good friend Jo Cox, and probably a friend of many of you, paid with her life, right? So this is a really difficult time. And so many of them think, yes, I want to do citizens, but how do I do it safely? Number 5, politicians need to be convinced that it can deliver on what they need as well, because they do need to get reelected, or else someone who isn't them gets reelected to not deliver on the mandate. when reframed from innovation to a practical tool. So the word innovation may be limiting to us because innovation makes people feel stupid that you haven't done something before, but who's against practical tools to do new things? So my background's in behavioral science, so I think a lot about language and how that is invitational. There is a specific desire to engage young people and demand from young people, because if you can get something on Uber, why can't you talk to politicians? So we heard that a lot. And then engaging politicians needs to start with empathy, and maybe even thank you and gratitude and respect. So those were our top findings. And what's exciting about it is if you look at the innovation uptake curve, there are a bunch of folks here, I'm sitting next to one right here, who are the innovators and early adopters. What our opportunity and challenge is to how to move into this early majority spectrum, right, in order to get it into the late majorities. We don't have time here to talk about political parties, but I would love to afterwards, because I think it's an opportunity and a challenge to think about the role that political parties play in this. And I'm not going to talk a lot about this. You can read this in the report, but a lot of what we are identifying with the gaps is, what are the mindsets of these early adopters, and how are they different potentially than the late majority people, and how do we understand that? What are the psychographics of different people? Instead of fighting them, how do you understand what they need out of it and work with them to use these really important tools? Now, what we did from this is we wrote something called Circular Power Politics. I just want to say as part of this series, I really love the word collaborative democracy a lot. We had been thinking about how do we reframe this very linear approach that we often feel that there's an election, then you go away for 4 years, 6 years, 2 years. We decided to come up with to use the word circular because it should be seen as a circle. But I'm really intrigued by the word collaborative and what are the opportunities and barriers with the word collaborative to different political parties. It's something I'd love to talk more about. So I wanted to share with you quickly, and this is the input that we see. It's been quite interesting because I think as public servants, the traditional you get the mandate and then you go deliver on the mandate. We see public servants beginning to more engage. What role can the politician have in more engaging throughout the cycle? Don't just give it all to the civil servants, but how they can do that. So this is a reframing that we're trying to do. So I wanted to just share a few things that I think is important as we think about, it's very hard to think about deliberative everything when we still have representative democracy. Now, I know that sortition is something that people are talking about, but in the path to a world where we don't have politicians anymore, if that's something that we want, by the way, I don't know if you knew that 51% of Europeans voted to replace politicians with AI, even when they were told that the AI is biased and full of flaws. So I think it's quite interesting where we're on the space. But I wanted to share this with you, like the big metaphors that we're talking about. That linear politics really looks at politicians working for citizens. I get up every day and I work for you. Populist, which is why I'm really concerned about the language of how we talk about democracy down and politicians aren't doing this and all politicians are like this, which is not helpful language because we know it's not true. We have a politician sitting here. The populists are saying, we are the citizens, we are you, right? They are citizens. Are you a citizen? Yes, she's a citizen too. But I think what we're trying to say with circular power politics, what we're hearing good response from politicians, it's working with and for the citizens. It's this with and for politics that I think we're really talking about from the political point of view. Now, when we talk to politicians about why they might want to use deliberative tools, everything from mini publics to legislative theater to citizens' assemblies, all the different ways that you write about in the wave, the 5 main reasons are: how do I get elected and get reelected? Leading on an issue you really care about. Responding to a crisis. There's been a few, there will be more of them. So how do you respond to the crisis? Finding a resolution on an intractable issue. We saw this with Ireland, and I'm sure you all know that example if you're Democratic junkies. And then how do you rebuild trust? What you talked about, Miriam, like how do we use this as a tool? And what I'll leave you at from this perspective is this isn't just a UK phenomenon. This isn't definitely not anywhere can say that doing it better than everyone. This is going on around the world. There are examples from Nigeria co-creating startup legislation with young entrepreneurs. We see it happening in Australia with the Teal movement. We had an obese mayor in Oklahoma decide to work with the citizens to lose £1 million in a city. So we're seeing really globally this going on. And what gets us excited about seeing this globally is how do we share those lessons? We don't need to recreate the wheels. If something didn't work, then how do we do it differently? I think that when things don't work, how do we celebrate the learning of that versus say, hey, it didn't work, Okay, it didn't, but what can we learn from that? How can we make it better? That's the agility that we're looking for. And I'll leave you with my apolitical hat. I have a lot of hope for this topic becoming more mainstream and being much more used by public servants or civil servants, as you call them here, being leaders everywhere. Because apolitical, day in and day out, we see interest from our public servants saying, we want to learn more about this. How do we do it? And how do we do it massively inclusively? Like, how does this really happen? I'll leave you with a bit of a provocation related to that, though. Marion, you asked us to say, you want to learn about this. I wonder what we're missing sometimes in politics with this deliberative piece. So I have the privilege of talking to extraordinary civil servants around the world every day. And one from a country, which will go unnamed because this is on deep background, said, I heard about the deliberative process. I really think this is important. I really want to know what the citizens want. So they did a countrywide, really high engagement, online and in-person process. We could talk about whether the process was a good process or not process, but they did one, and the citizens really loved it. They felt listened to. They made new friends. They engaged in and made commitments to be involved in their in their communities, and they came back with a list of 24 recommendations to send to the politicians. And they, this person had worked with the politicians to say, how do you want to be engaged or not? The politicians said, no, let's let the government do it, and then we'll sit back, cross-party, and just really look at what's going on. And when you looked at those 24 recommendations, 23 of the recommendations were actually legislative or already happening, but the citizens didn't know about it, feel its effect. So I wonder, in all of this trust building, how much of it is actually the process versus the ongoing engagement and communication that a lot of this is happening. So that's a bit of the provocation I have. So leave it there.
Thank you. Fantastic. Thank you very much. I'm going to turn to Claudia now. Can you share some of the participatory and deliberative policy-making methods that you've seen be institutionalised successfully? And again, it's like, what are the lessons for the UK?
Yeah, no, thank you, Miriam. It's really nice to be here, and I think a nice transition. And actually, one of the things I want to pick up on, though, is about language, because I actually very intentionally don't use the language of tools.
Yeah.
So something we can talk about, because the way that I've been kind of approaching this work for a while has been thinking about how can we really be building new democratic institutions for another democratic paradigm, and how does our whole mindset shift actually about what that entails, what that means for power and relationships when it's an institution and not just a tool. But I think there's pros and cons to these approaches. So I prepared a few slides as well, just a little bit about what is Democracy Next and what is the work that we're doing on these topics, our role as an international research and learning hub, because I completely share that spirit of really needing to learn from what's working, what's not working, and having that approach to iteration and going off of that. And then sharing from two key bits of work that we're doing around pushing systemic change with cities, and also really pushing innovation for things to keep evolving with an approach to employing technology within assemblies. So Democracy Next is an international research and action institute, and our mission is to really be trying to shift who has power and how are we taking decisions together, both in government but also other kinds of organizations that are part of our daily lives. So we've done some work with museums, we're going to work with cooperatives. These ideas and principles can be applying to universities and schools and all sorts of other kinds of organizations. And the three key principles that kind of underpin all of the work that we do and what we really believe in are sortition, deliberation, and participation. So sortition, I think I'm probably speaking to a room where people know this, but by this I mean selecting decision makers by lottery. Deliberation, meaning collectively weighing evidence to come to shared decisions off the back of that evidence. And then participation, which really just acknowledges that we all should have the agency and dignity to be involved in shaping the decisions that are affecting us. And the work that we're doing builds on what has been called the Bible now for the first time that I've heard, but the work that myself and my colleague Yeva, who's working with us at Democracy Next, have done at the OECD. There's a database that has 733 examples of citizens' assemblies that have taken place all over the world. So we're not starting from scratch. There's a wealth of things that we know about. We developed evaluation guidelines because we believe there's a need to be evaluating and learning from, and also thinking about how do we move from ad hoc one-off initiatives to institutionalized forms of deliberation. And at Democracy Next, we're sort of building on this and transforming a lot of that knowledge into resources that can be a lot more accessible. So we've published a guide to assembling an assembly, which will now be translated and released soon in 3 or 4 other languages. We're working on developing an online learning program, so exploring various partnerships, potentially with a political foundation. So we'll see how do we, because there is a big demand actually to be learning how to do this. And just to give you a bit of a sense, so I mentioned we've done some work with museums. We're working with architects on spaces for deliberation and exploring what needs to be in place there. We're doing research on deliberation as an antidote to authoritarianism in Europe. I'm going to zoom in a little bit on our work on tech-enhanced assemblies. We've also had a collaboration with the European University Institute about the European level. And I'm going to zoom into our work on 6 ways to democratize city planning, which has been one of our key kind of bits of flagship work around thinking about how could we be enabling thriving and healthy cities by changing the ways in which a lot of the key decisions at the city level get taken. So we had put together an international task force on democratizing city planning, and this is a key kind of way in which we work. So these are 15 people from 15 different countries, and it's a mix of architects, planners, former chief city planners, investors, developers, governance experts, and we work together with them over an online series, and this is our meeting in person in The Hague, over the course of 9 months to come up with a set of proposals for 6 ways in which we could be making systemic changes. So not having just better participation processes for these kinds of decisions, but how could we change the way in which decisions related to housing and infrastructure, mobility get taken every time they have to be taken. And so we did this work because we see these sorts of issues are the same all over the world. Before we launched this, we did interviews with people in different countries, those different roles. Actually, we spoke to some of your colleagues in Camden even, I remember at that stage. And there's just a shared sense of these problems being shared in cities around the world. And we really believe that we don't just need different policy solutions to these issues that we're facing all over the place. We really need a different way in which we're taking these decisions on an ongoing basis. And these new governance models can help break through deadlocks and give legitimacy to the sometimes hard choices that need to be made that require trade-offs. And so I'm not going to go into the details of this, but just to give you the overall schema of what we came up with. So we thought about 3 different types of assemblies. So still thinking about when ad hoc assemblies around new development projects or new infrastructure projects might come up. Rethinking that community level. Sometimes these are called neighborhood boards or community councils. How could they both work differently and perhaps have a different kind of function and relationship and connection to this? And learning from the experiences of some of the first permanent citywide assemblies in Brussels and Paris and other places that have been implemented so that there's this ongoing deliberation among citizens. But really importantly, we thought about not just that these need to exist, but what is their relationship with public authorities, with elected officials, with planners, with developers, with civil society organizations that are doing really important work on this, as well as there's like a wealth of really amazing participatory initiatives that exist in this space in terms of community mapping and data gathering and design workshops and citizen science. And at the moment, a lot of this stuff happens in parallel. So how could we actually more holistically connect the dots between some of these things? And so we didn't just want these ideas to live in a nice report, but we had an open call for cities to apply to work with us over the past month since we launched this. This was just in February, and we had 21 applications from cities in 17 different countries. So we're doing interviews right now, and we're going to have 3 or 4 city partnerships that will work for 18 months to be working with cities to implement these ideas and put those into practice. And then the last thing I wanted to share to give another sense of, that's one bit of work of trying to really shift and push the needle on systemic change, but we're also really interested in how do we push innovation in the field with the work we're doing in collaboration with the MIT Center for Constructive Communication on tech-enhanced citizens' assemblies. So we're working with this center that has a really unique partnership with this nonprofit called CordCo, and I say this because it's literally the only thing at MIT that exists like this, and it's what enables us to work with MIT in this research piloting prototyping phase to build something that can be scaled and deployed at scale once it's ready to kind of go out into the field, because that's really our ambition with this at the end of the day as well. So the team at MIT has been working on developing this platform called Fora, which connects through a kind of recording device to a backend, and they've connected it to work they've been doing around community dialogues that have taken place mostly in person, also on Zoom, and there's also an app version of this that you see here. And we've been thinking about how could we connect this technology that they've been building for the past 7 or 8 years into the Citizens Assembly. So this is a sort of kind of basic schema of, say, a 5-day Citizens Assembly and the different phases of it. And we've been thinking about what would a tech-enhanced Citizens Assembly entail. So one is about employing their existing technology and methods that they've already used with 100 different organizations around community engagement to enable a better form of wider public engagement to feed in as an evidence base into an assembly process. A next bit relates to and the next part around identifying shared values. So one of the researchers that works at the center has developed this game called Analogia, which is played actually in person with physical cards, but there's a really beautiful tech back end that relates to all of the images and all of the questions that are being asked related to the group of people that are part of this and the issue on which they're deliberating, to enable them to identify their shared values before they go into the deliberation process, which might seem like a minor thing, but actually there's research which shows us that this kind of group building and shared values work is the most important thing related to people being able to handle the complexity in a deliberation as they go into it. So actually thinking through creative ways of how we could be making this better and how tech can be helping is actually really crucial. Another thing we want to do in the future, but we're not doing now, is also thinking about how tech can be improving the learning phase of an assembly. And then we're working on how the deliberation and the consensus building can be helped by AI sense making to feed into the draft recommendations. So how this works at the moment is, say, from any one of these like small group conversations that happened, there's a recording that takes place, and each one of these lines here is a different person speaking in that conversation. So when you think about all of these being many different conversations that have taken place, either in that community engagement phase, say there's been 100 small group conversations that have fit in, or during an assembly where there's always this dynamic of small groups and then a big group coming together to work towards a shared set of recommendations, having AI help to interpret and organize this information into the main themes that have come out is actually really incredibly powerful and helpful. But all of it also stays rooted in voice. So there's synthesis that comes out of this, but you can click into any of these links in the summaries, and they always link back to voice notes from what was said during that conversation, with a transcript that you can go into, so you never interpret that out of context either. So this is just some of there's a lot that can be done in the back end that maybe I won't go into here. Just to say another thing we're looking at with the researchers is another way you could be analyzing the conversation. So this is one of the researchers at the MIT Center who has worked on what they've called flowers, where each of these dots is a person in a conversation, and you can be measuring the responsivity between people, the turn taking that has happened, and all sorts of other things to get a sense of the quality of the conversations that have taken place. And then the last thing is about actually having a better public archive of what's happening in these assemblies. Like, we have public archives of what happens in our city council decision-making moments, in our parliaments, and we don't really have a proper public archive of what's happening in our assembly processes. And so this is an example of the kind of archives that the MIT team has done for some of the community dialogue works, but you can also, again, go in and have what happened and what took place grounded in voice. And we want to be working on different things, like if you have a final set of recommendations, is there a way you could kind of listen to and see what was the initial genesis of that idea and what were parts of the conversation that led to it? How did people get there? So anyways, we're working on a whole bunch of different things that can be done in this space, but I think it's important for the kind of trustworthiness of these processes, and I think for the kind of history and the legacy of them, and I think connected maybe to what I see as one of the bigger picture things that needs to happen of moving actually to decision-making assemblies. And this is not about replacing politicians, but I think that if there is going to be an assembly that is commissioned, I think we're actually at a place where we should experiment with this being a decision-making body and exploring what does that mean for accountability and legitimacy. And I think having a public archive of what happened in this process is incredibly important when we're going in that direction. So we have a few upcoming pilots. We did a first kind of MIT student assembly to test some of these things out, and we'll be working with a few different countries in the next few months, and open to other people who want to experiment in the context of actual assemblies there. So I think there's a lot in there that I would say hopefully applies to the context of the UK. Just wanted to share a little bit of where the thinking sits, and I think a lot of it is aligned with what Lisa was sharing earlier too.
Cool.
So,
Fabulous, thank you. A lot of cutting edge stuff there. Georgia, if we come to you, if you could tell us a bit about what you're doing in Camden, and specifically kind of what you think has worked really well and where you've hit up challenges, and again, what can Westminster learn from?
Brilliant. It's so exciting to hear you both, and I think it does feel like a big moment where there is so much of this work happening and a movement coming, which is very bottom up, but having you both in different ways kind of bringing that together, sharing the learning and pushing us forward, I think is so critical and important. And I think, as everyone said, in different ways, the how for me is just as important as the what. And I think that's for 4 reasons. I think the first is that's come up in lots of different ways is how much pressure democracy is under, the kind of alienation people feel around politics. Before I became leader of council, I spent 2 years talking to young people around the country, and there was so much energy about changing their communities and a real deep distrust about getting involved in informal politics, and we have to bridge that gap. But I think that what's happened over the last few years is there's an increasing polarisation. So it used to feel like politics was everyone kind of screaming in a crowded room, and now it feels like we're all in soundproof rooms screaming separately, and there's not enough conversations happening that bring people together. And if we let that continue, then we cannot be complacent, I think, about our democratic institutions. I think the second thing for me, and it's I really see it in a place like Camden, is inequality of power within existing democratic institutions. Those who have more time, who are more settled, homeowners, who have more resource, are often much more able to navigate political processes and have their voice heard than those who are facing deep poverty. Their lives are very unsettled. And you see that through the planning process and so many different democratic decision making that one group has a disproportionate voice, and that leads, I think, to poor decision, but also ends up deepening inequalities. The third is just the increasing complexity of the challenges we face, from the climate crisis to health inequality. There's no challenge that will be solved with kind of government working on its own. You need new coalitions of the private, public, voluntary sector working along citizens to solve those big challenges. And I think finally, if you actually want good outcomes for public services, and you can throw money at something, but unless you're working alongside people about their lived experience of public services, unless they feel ownership and a stake in them, it won't fundamentally change outcomes. And I think I've seen that every time we try and deliver public services, and they need to be delivered alongside people, as has been said. So in Camden, we've been on a 7-year journey of trying to make this transformation at every level, and we have learned a lot along the way. Some things have gone really well, some things have been harder, so I can try and share quickly some of those challenges. But I'll just run through the kind of 3 areas I think we've been really focused on. The first is the decision-making side. We've run 10 citizens' assemblies. I really believe in assemblies. We pay people for their time. We put a lot of work into ensuring they're genuinely representative of our community. We take really difficult challenges. The latest one we did was on the nighttime economy, where you can imagine there's really different views from parts of our community who about whether things should be closed really early, whether there should be more alcohol venues, different kinds of venues, all sorts of big questions there. We started off as you said earlier, with the climate crisis. And I think that they have been really critical in that you get better decisions at the end of it, often braver decisions than we would make on our own as politicians. And the decisions have they have a greater creativity. But even as important is that actual dialogue, people from very different experiences having really deep conversations based on evidence and coming closer together. And when you talk to people, they say to you, I started off in one place, but as a result of those conversations, it changed the way I think about things. And there have been so many moments where I wish I could bottle the high people feel at the end of it. There was a woman who came as a refugee to the UK. She'd lived here for 20 years, and she said, being a conformal citizen for 15, but she said being part of that process is the first time she ever actually felt like a citizen. A young person saying it's the first time they felt like they had a voice, a carer saying the first time they felt part of their community. Being part of the process really changes people's view of what it feels like to live in a democracy. So I would love everyone in Camden and the country to have that experience. So believe in citizens' assemblies, but we've also been trialling different ways of deliberative, participatory kind of engagement. We've just been piloting participatory budgeting as part of one of our missions. I'll come on to that. And we worked with citizen scientists, UCL University supported it, on developing a wellbeing index for Camdens. And when we're making decisions, we're judging them not just by the things we might look at, like how many jobs they create, but also what do citizens feel are important. And there's a lot in there about connectedness, community heritage that we might not necessarily come up with if we were looking at those alone. So I think it's been really important in that democratic space. The second is actually, as I said, the delivery of public services. And for me, this is so important, and often the state has real power over people's lives, and making sure that people are involved in those really difficult areas is critical. And I think for me that there's no more difficult area for local government than our ability to the state to take children away from parents for safeguarding reasons. And it's an area where people might think, oh, you can't do deliberation, it's just too sensitive. But we did a lot of work with families or parents who had that experience, whose children had been taken into care, and they did a whole review of how we delivered children's services. And these were really hard conversations. They were hard for those parents coming back to a place where there was huge trauma associated, hard for staff. There was a lot of courage and forgiveness and difficult conversations that happened. But as a result of that, we really transformed how we delivered those services. The parents' ideas about creating parent champions to help people navigate the process, explaining how something like a multidisciplinary team meeting that we think is great because all the different professionals working around a family all come together and you're having one conversation. What they said is they felt like they were judged by 8 different people in the room, and that can feel really alienating. So how do we transform those conversations so parents feel supported? So and as a result of that work, we've seen far fewer children coming into care. We're working much better alongside our parents. We're saving a lot of money as well, but most importantly, we're delivering a better service. service. And then the third area is in supporting community and social action. So that's where we're supporting our voluntary sector, where we're working with an organisation based in Camden around participatory grant making, that any citizen who has an idea to deliver one of our missions, we have 4 big missions that we've developed alongside our community post COVID, can apply for money but also support to make those ideas a reality. So in kind of every pocket of Camden, you're seeing people stepping up to lead their communities. So it might be that they're running community walks, meals, young people running clothes swaps, different things that food co-ops, different things that are actually changing people's lives on the ground, but also giving individuals agency to make a difference. So that's a kind of broad sweep of the different things we're doing, but there's lots within that. But I wanted to quickly say something about the big challenges we faced. I think one challenge is, like, you know, I run a council, it's a big bureaucracy, and we're not always set up to respond to the agility of citizens' questions, and, you know, often we are the block, you know, actually we just need to get out the way. And so we've had to go on a real journey to not just hear recommendations, but to work in a dialogue. And we've had to become much more flexible, much more relational, and bring staff along that journey so they are engaged in those relationships. But that has been, I think, the hardest part of it. I think the second is sometimes this creates a lot of fear for those who have kind of established power, not just politicians, but those who have run residents' associations, that have always been the voice of a community, but maybe aren't doing this deliberative work, or established tenants' organisations, and sometimes they feel that their power is being threatened. So actually, you know, you're not dismissing those really important active citizens, but you're bringing them part of a journey, and that's been something that we've really had to negotiate and can be quite difficult. And then another challenge is just the politics of some of this work. You know, my opposition can get up, and we've been doing this work around imagination activism that I can talk about, and say, God, that sounds like wishy-washy crap, basically. Why are you wasting public money on this work? And so you have to make the case that this does save money, that this does change lives, because it can be really hard to talk about in the abstract. You know, when it's not what I put on a manifesto, but that doesn't mean it's not critically important. And I can say without a shadow of a doubt, the change that we've made in Camden, that I can feel now, you know, you can go to different parts of a borough and you can see the fruits of it, you know, in shops that have come to life with new think and do spaces and new community action, that it's unlocked an energy that I couldn't have imagined. And we're still kind of early on the journey, really. But you have to be brave in investing in it. So that leads me to what government can do. This requires investment. If you're going to value people's time, and you're taking that point about inequality, you need to pay them, or make sure that they get a qualification, or that they get childcare, that it's an experience that is meaningful for them, and that their lived experience is valued. So you have to invest in it as a proper infrastructure, and that has to come nationally, because local government funding has been absolutely decimated. You know, it's not cheap to run an assembly, and so I do think we need to see some dedicated funding and capacity building for this. I think this links hand in hand with devolution. A lot, you know, you can run big national assemblies, and I think you should do, but a lot of this really grassroots kind of community involvement is best done at a local level, how you run a youth centre, participatory budgeting. So we need to give more power into local government to work more deeply in this way alongside communities. And then I would say the kind of work you're both doing, working with organisations like yourselves to really capacity build, to kind of, it takes, you know, I think being a good leader is like being a magpie. You just go around and, you know, find what other people are doing. And, you know, like today, you know, we're always taking great kind of practice that people talk about. But actually, if there are more places that are really actively saying that this is what has worked in this place, and so we can kind of explore and learn from each other, so that kind of movement we've talked about, and hopefully that's what the collaborative democracy network will be about as well, then I think we'll move faster together to the kind of transformation we need to see.
Amazing, thank you. We've got about 15 minutes, so usually I'd use chair's privilege and kind of ask some questions, but actually I'm going to open it up to you. We would love to hear your questions for any of, I think I'll get that, there you go, Lisa, Claudia or Georgia. who would like to go first?
I'll go
I'm
first.
going to take 3 questions to start with, hand over. So, yeah, one here, and then, sorry, the lady at the front here, and then this gentleman.
Lovely, thank you. So, can you hear me? I don't know if this is on.
It's not actually
Yeah.
on, that's actually just so people online can hear you.
Oh, lovely. Okay, great. Thank you, everyone, so much. Those were such interesting contributions from each of you. I'm Camilla Buchanan. I run a team in central government called the Policy Lab, and we are 10 actually this month and have been doing kind of participatory work in central government for all of that time. But I was so interested, Georgia, in what you said about it is a bit of a moment. So we've been around for quite a long time, but there is quite a lot that feels like it's kind of crystallising. And I would just be so interested, picking up on what you said at the end about actually these are some of the things that we could do. I think probably for the perspective of civil servants and internal to government, it is about this kind of capacity building question. I think there are a ton of practical barriers that I'm a bit less interested in because I think they are easier to fix. But I sort of have a bit of a tricky, but hopefully there might be some inspiration from different places question, which is like, what is the thing? If there was a thing or a kind of initiative, or maybe it's something a bit broader than that, that you think civil servants in central government should be doing, is it actually about skills and awareness? Is it about, as you say, license? Is it about somehow being better connected to local government? Is there something from your kind of breadth of experience that you guys might have seen where you're like, this just isn't happening, but it should be? Because that I think would be so interesting for folk in my position to hear.
Thank you. And you did it perfectly, so thank you. But when you ask a question, would you mind introducing yourself and telling us who you are? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Eva Pasco. I'm a chair of Cyber Salon, which has been involved in participatory democracy probably for 25 years. We're quite early involved. And I'm also a Camden inhabitant, and I can only support what you said. It's really felt that you guys are making a difference.
You could have said the opposite.
No. But it's really been, I know how hard it is, but, it's palpable how people are getting it. So I've totally supported that, little and often, but for a long time, eventually the message gets through. So we've been involved in a couple of very good projects that landed, and they all had 2 features about them. There was a budget to pay people to show up, and there was a budget committed to a decision. So whatever the decision was being debated, because it's always about something that costs money, that budget was given. And whoever was in charge of the money was committed that whatever the outcome will be, at least 80% of the outcome will be funded. One of these projects was funded with Nesta, called Flourish, very successful. Another one is in Poland, in Gdańsk, which was funded by Mayor. It was a very painful project, and there was a lot of people going to lose things, but the transition was funded. And people showed up, argued, where all sorts of things happened. So the question for me was, how long, from your experience, how long these more successful projects need to take place to we have enough money to pay them, but deliver the outcome that these people can then go back and be your ambassadors back in the communities. Because I've seen it working, some better than others, but I'm always thinking that there's got to be a methodology we can just take and roll out.
Thank you.
Well, my name is Elliot Heilper, and I'm founder of investment banking consultancy, so I'm not a politician. I speak from the heart, and I work with institutions, I work with not-for-profit entities, and I was involved with the United Nations, and I work with institutions in Wall Street. And I'm sorry to sound a cynic, but I have to tell you this, and I would like your response. Everything you say is wonderful. How can anyone disagree with what you're saying? But with the greatest of respect, I'd like to come back to, and this is where you'll shoot me, reality. If I look at the United Kingdom, if I look at the Western world, our democratic world, our freedom, our democratic, loving, Judeo-Christian values that we supposedly have adopted over the years, I'm afraid what you're saying is wonderful, but you won't get it out. I would like you to get it out. You won't, and I'll tell you why, and I'd like your response. Because if you take this country, just as one example, there is no leadership here. Now, you know, I'm sticking my neck on the block and people will disagree with you, but I'm giving my personal opinion. There's no leadership at all. There's no economic leadership. There's no spiritual leadership. There's no social leadership. The country, unfortunately, has no leadership at all. And when there is leadership, there is no understanding or precedent to manage the problems. COVID was a good example. There was never... Okay, fine. So my question is, very simply, what you're saying is great, but if there's no real leadership and have the courage to take these things forward in this country and our wider democratic Western world, given what's going on, I think you will find it a challenge. So my question is, where are the leaders? And if they're not around, which they're not, how are you going to find the relevant people in order to get your message out? And that isn't just from me, that's from the thousands, I mean thousands of people that I speak to and I present to in the last 4 or 5 years. Thank you.
Interestingly, I think kind of the first and last questions are touching on the same thing. It's like, in reality, how do we actually make this happen? What are the messages that we need to, or things that we need to build or learn within the civil service and politicians, and how do we essentially persuade political leadership that we can actually make this happen in reality? Whoever wants to go first.
I can touch on two quickly. Number 1 and number 3. When we co-founded Apolitical, I really thought what public servants needed, or civil servants, whatever you call it, was like the good ideas on how to do things. Like if they just had the good ideas from, they would do them, right? The best policy ideas for sustainable climate and the newest ideas around gender equality and how to do, you know, innovative tax and tech and AI and all of this. And what I want to just come back to is what we heard when we interviewed older, younger, all over the world, up, down, and around. What they said is number 1, in order for us to make any change, to do anything, we want to feel a sense of belonging and appreciation. I just want to go back to first principles, just basically, how do you have sense of belonging and appreciation? How do I, quote unquote, have the soft skills and the mindset? So how do I be agile? How do I make mistakes? How do I really listen to other people? How do I really collaborate with people? How do I manage people that are different from me? Like these quote unquote soft skills that are so critically important that I find often doesn't get invested in. And then you need the how to, and what they don't want as much. This is what we heard. They definitely want to work with practitioners that are doing the work, but they want to, and this is why your city network is so interesting. How has someone else in another city in political constraints done it? What worked and what didn't? They want to really talk to the real people who are facing the same kind of constraints. So I think the leadership work, the soft skills that aren't so soft, and then the network of how do we do it, and there's great things to come off of. I just wanted to speak to your question about leadership just quickly. As one of the things I get to do every single day is against all the negativity that we hear in politics about those politicians everywhere not having this or not having that. I'm talking to people all around the world that are right now knowing that they're going to get death threats, knowing how hard this is, who are raising their hand and saying, I want to get involved in politics because we have to. There's no other choice. So I'm seeing this extraordinary wave of brave and courageous people. And my answer to people when they say there's no leadership, I always say to back them, well, then go get involved in politics. If you don't like it, then go change it. That's my response. So there's a wave of really extraordinary people happening around the world. My 2 cents.
Thank you.
So in terms of practical things that I think make a difference, in terms of citizens' assemblies, I think one of the big challenges that lots of councils will find is that actually there's not that many infrastructure organisations who can actually help you develop the assemblies. You know, there's a kind of art to, you know, sending out all of the letters and making sure you have a representative group and managing the actual processes, and the couple that are always oversubscribed. So maybe there's something you can do in helping to support that kind of infrastructure, so you can kind of then open up to councils who say you've got an idea for a deliberative process, we've actually kind of funded that infrastructure support for you. I think what we've ended up doing in Camden now is try to kind of grow our own capacity to be able to do it, because there isn't much else out there, but you know, lots of councils just aren't in a position to do that. So I think that would make a difference. I think the second thing you could look at is is philanthropic funders and how they're supporting kind of participatory grant making and these kind of processes, because there's just not a lot of spare money in local government at the moment. So, but there is such desire to do this, and especially out of COVID, I think you really saw the real need for that kind of deep community work and the kind of people believe in it, but there's not the capacity. So could you convene a group of funders? Maybe UCL have been working with us to develop a Citizens Academy program that's actually training, giving kind of qualifications to those who are citizen scientists, potential partners like that, to kind of grow some of the good work that's already happening with partners that are there. The question about leadership. Well, I'm a leader and I meet local government leaders all the time that are doing this work, but I'm also a Labour politician, and I absolutely agree that the leadership of a country is not working. So I would say change the government. And then to the question of to our Camden resident, really lovely to meet you, and we should chat afterwards. I think you really need to stick with it, and I think the assemblies that have worked best are those which have built in long-term accountability. So what out of a climate assembly, the residents said they wanted to set up a climate panel that would hold us to account on the recommendations, and so we go to them on a quarterly basis and we continue to kind of report in, and that's been going on now for like 4 years. And so there's the kind of depth and long-term engagement, and one of the things that we're really thinking about now is we've got this whole kind of host of people who've been through some kind of democratic process. They've been a citizen scientist, a community champion, part of an assembly, who are engaged, and how do we continue to work with those people so they can be kind of active leaders even though they're not kind of still going through an assembly. So that's something that we're kind of thinking about. I'd love to talk about more.
Claudia, anything you want to come in on?
Yeah, I just wanted to come in especially on some of the first questions, because I think this point about, I mean, one of the things that I feel is so missing is this capacity and infrastructure within government at all levels around this. Like, I think we kind of forget, because it's become invisible to us, how much infrastructure exists around elections in terms of like money and capacity and resources to make sure that these processes, as much as possible, are actually run fairly and with legitimacy, and there's a whole kind of background amount of money and people who know how to do these things, and we don't have that around a lot of these deliberative processes, participatory budgeting. I think it's maybe in some places now that it's been longer, but part of why assemblies today also cost a fair amount is that you're starting from scratch every time, and you don't have any of this existing additional supportive infrastructure that's in place. So I mentioned that we're going to be working with the different cities that we're working with now for at least the next 18 months. Most of them don't have any existing team members. Some of them don't even have a participation team within the city council. They have a commitment to building that up. We're going to be working with them over a 9-week capacity building program that has 9 modules that also will bring in people from different cities and different places, a mix of practitioners and civil servants, some academics as well, to bring some perspectives on evaluation, so that they hear from us, but also from others in different parts of the world and get connected to a wider movement of people, but that there also is a whole process of actually building up an infrastructure and those skills and capacities which are just often missing. And I kind of wonder what a question is for like an organization like Policy Lab, what's the connection to maybe helping build that out or being a link to other local councils? Because I agree with you as well. I think that part of it is just a lack of funding that needs to go in closer to people on the ground to be doing this. As much as I think that, you know, there's also no shortage of really relevant policy, legislative, maybe constitutional questions at a national level that could be addressed using these assemblies as well. But I think we underestimate also some of the temporality of the change that's needed. Like, I'm not sure exactly when you first started all this work in Camden. Now it's starting to be really evident to people that this is happening, but it doesn't happen overnight either. And I think part of it is an investment in the fact that, you know, within 6 months, things are not going to magically change. We're not going to magically have wonderful, trusting relationships between people, and things will work completely differently. I see this change on a much longer term kind of time scale too. So I think that's one of the other challenges sometimes too with doing this work, is kind of conveying that and being patient and getting the investment needed for like the fruits of that to be born much later. But, yeah.
Thank you. I think we've got time for one question. Somebody's got something online? Yeah, go.
Kelly McBride from TPX Impact asks, how have Assembly participants felt about the use of AI where it's been tested? Were they happy with the outputs from the sense-making exercises? And how did you prepare participants for the use of AI and to make sure that they were feeling comfortable?
All right, I think that's a very specific question. I'll be short, so maybe there's time for one more. So far we've only tested this in the context of an MIT student assembly to be having a low risk environment to do some testing with. But at the very outset, actually, we had explained to them all the different things that we were doing, how we were going to test. We did a whole bunch of evaluation during the whole process too, and we shared with them at the end the data from that. And people were really interested to learn and to see about this. And we definitely have this kind of same mentality and approach now when we're starting to design actual assemblies where we're going to be introducing aspects of the AI. And I think, there's real questions that are coming up that we're asking ourselves around which parts of this should be recorded, which parts should not be recorded, but also how could we be using new aspects of technology. For example, like one of the other bits of work that some of the researchers are doing are voice anonymization, where somebody's same tonality of how they said something can be kept, but their voice completely changed. So if people want something to remain anonymous, it enables actually being able to share something out. Also thinking about how AI-generated summaries could be used for some aspects, so you don't get the full, deep context, but parts of it could be shared. So we've been doing evaluations actually on the accuracy, representativeness, other things of those AI-generated summaries in a deliberation. So this is also why I emphasized we need to be connecting research and evaluation to any of this experimentation too, because a lot of these questions we don't have the answers to yet, but we need to ask the questions, I think, and I think we need to be trying things out, but being very transparent with people, what we're doing, why we're doing it, how this will be evaluated, and sharing all of that with people too.
I'll just make a really quick point, because I think that one of the challenges that we've come up against is we're really keen to do these assemblies in public and for people to see the conversations that happen, but people are really nervous for all the reasons you talk about, the kind of pressure to be public and exposed. And I think that's something that we often try and balance in how we summarize the discussion. We wouldn't film it and then put it out, because there's often a lot of fear around that. So I think I'm really interested in those kind of methods, because I find that's always a kind of balancing tool between people feeling private and safe enough to have real discussions through to this being a broader process that you want people to be able to follow.
Well, typically the small group discussions are private, and the plenaries might be public, but this is where thinking about how could we have nonetheless a public archive, but in a way that preserves, I think, that necessary feeling of people feeling safe to talk about hard things and being vulnerable and able to. So I think
I'm really excited about it. I think there is a real kind of
hear you on that.
Fantastic. We probably have time for one more question. Great.
Thank you. Graham Allen, the convener of the Citizens' Convention on UK Democracy, prior to that 30 years as a Member of Parliament and founder of the Select Committee on Political and Constitutional Reform. I'll keep this very quick, a very sharp question to perhaps the four people up there, because Miriam, I think, could answer this one too. One thing we've not mentioned today is that there's a general election coming up in this country. It is a massive opportunity, and perhaps with a change of government, an opportunity that last occurred 27 years ago in terms of hopefully progressing these sort of policies. If by some strange chance I was able to give each of the members of the panel 10 minutes in front of the incoming Prime Minister and say to that Prime Minister, you can only talk about citizens' assemblies, what is the question? What is the request that each panel member would have of the Prime Minister about setting up citizens' assemblies as a part of our political culture, as much a part of our political culture as the ballot box in the United Kingdom?
Thank you.
I want Miriam's answer.
No, it's yours off the hook. I just get to prod you. Okay. I think if I had 10 minutes and one more of a request, maybe a demand of the Prime Minister, I would ask that each incoming Secretary of State selected the one wicked issue that they cannot solve, that they know is going to be hitting their inbox, and they know they're going to push it into the long grass because it is too hard, it's too difficult, it's too long term. And I would ask him to ask each of his Secretaries of State to pick that question and open it up. And just like, let the world, let the country help you with that. Let's kind of take it out of your inbox and actually put it out there in reality, and let's make that happen. But it would be one across each of the spending departments.
So the leader of the Labour Party is my local MP, so he's actually seen a lot of our work in practice and citizens' assemblies. And I think that what I'm really excited about in Labour's platform is the missions agenda, because I think missions have the potential to connect national government, regional government and local government around shared goals and really mobilise community. So I'd like us to be doing big national assemblies on the missions and local ones and supporting that capacity. So you're starting to really get a kind of a national sense of mission that links in with local community action.
I'm going to answer your question a little bit differently. I'm quite worried about any of these things becoming partisan. That is my biggest concern. So I don't care who is elected. I'm not a UK citizen. But I'm worried about it being seen as a legacy of a political party. I think it needs to go very, very deep in the DNA of what democracy means.
Yeah, I would echo that. That's actually been a criteria for choosing the cities. There has to be cross-partisan support for what we're doing. But say I got to speak after these ladies. No, I guess I think part of the request is really seeing the vision and the potential of this not being about this one-off opportunity, but how to build the institution of the future. Yeah. Part of that I think involves maybe investing in what I was talking about earlier, like a non-partisan, independent democracy commission of some sort that has investment and budget and training and capacity that could be supporting people delivering assemblies, not just at national level, but perhaps also connected to local initiatives as well. Because I think without that investment into that infrastructure and capacity and skills, and without the budget that goes around it, it's really hard for this change to become more sustainable as well. So
Definitely.
yeah.
Great place down.
And on that note, the last thing I wanted to do was actually just talk very quickly about the Citizens' White Paper, which is in part going to answer some of that question. It is a piece of work that Demos and Involve are working on together, and it is to set out not only the why we should involve citizens in public policy making, but the how and the when. So really getting into what are the institutions you need to build, the resources that you need, the capacity you need to build. And so this is a piece of work that we're designing and developing at the moment, which hopefully will get to that question. So if we could put that in front of any incoming Prime Minister, whoever it is, that would make hopefully the change that we could actually see this stuff institutionalised and embedded across the UK. And with that, I would like us all to just give our amazing panel a round of applause. Huge thanks to all of you for sharing all your thoughts, your expertise, everything that we can learn. There is so much exciting stuff happening out there and so much yet to do. Yeah. So the job is there. We're all kind of in it for the long haul. Thank you very much for sharing your expertise. Everybody, you're very welcome to stay for soft drinks, tea, coffee, biscuits and networking for as long as you'd like to stay. So thank you so much for joining us. Look forward to seeing you at the next one.
I'll take a look.
I'll send it to you, yeah. Does this get talked about at the party level, like institutionalizing this as the new normal?
I mean, there's not. I think it's part of the policy discourse. Yeah, but
It's fine. It doesn't have to be a separate thing.